Saturday night, and that he's using in other rallies. The way he has taken up Joe Biden's challenge to put the tape on his website to prove up the assertions on topics like Biden's support for a ban on fracking, which he's dutifully done.
He did that within minutes.
He also picked up on something else, and this is from the primary. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders arguing about Joe Biden's previous openness to cuts in Social Security and Medicare. Listen to this. This is Bernie and Joe Biden from the primary, and then Trump just picks up on it and says, essentially, thank you, Bernie. Good job.
Our great nation is now living in an unprecedented moment. We're facing the worst public health crisis in 100 years and the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. We are confronting systemic racism and the enormous threat to our planet of climate change. And in the midst of all of this, we have a president who is not only incapable of addressing these crises, but is leading us down the path of authoritarianism. This election is the most important in the modern history of this country. In response to the unprecedented crises we face, we need an unprecedented response, a movement like never before, of people who are prepared to stand up and fight for democracy and decency and against greed, oligarchy, and bigotry. And we need Joe Biden as our next president.
Well, that's obviously not it. All right, well, we'll effort that later, for goodness sakes. Anyway, let's talk about 50 things they don't want you to know about Trump with Jerome Hudson, entertainment editor for Breitbart and author of the new book by the title I just named. Jerome Hudson, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Good Lord.
Words are hard someday.
Monday morning. So here we are a week before the election. And gosh, you would think over the last 4 years plus 5 years, we've learned everything there is to learn about Trump. What is it that people should know that perhaps they don't?
Well, he has an amazing story to tell. I guess it's relevant. It's been in the news. But this country became a net exporter of natural gas and crude oil for the first time in more than 50 years. That has all had a direct effect, Dan, on American families. I mean, we're talking about thousands of dollars in savings a year, and it's a direct effect, again, of the president running sort of as a tax-cutting, regulation-reducing candidate, and then actually getting elected and signing a historic tax cut act that actually, again, cut taxes for families of four. The president has taken on our adversary as well. We have a neo-Nazi regime in China. I mean, they literally have the concentration camps in the Xinjiang province of that country, forced abortions, forced sterilizations, actual labor camps. Most of the political press isn't talking about it, but it is an absolute moral danger. And I think the president recognized that, specifically to the fact that China actually controls 80% of the rare earth mineral market on this planet. We're talking about 17 rocks, if you will, that are buried often deep in the bottom of the ocean. And China has for decades recognized their importance. They are important. They go into many of our medical devices, many of our military weapons, but everything from fishing rods to the battery-powered engines that we want to put into cars to put on our streets. The president ordered the Pentagon last year to have the United States Army increase its budget to actually search for rare earth elements for the first time since the Manhattan Project. And so it's been sort of a multifaceted approach from the president on issues of national security, the economy, our trade policy, sort of a reorientation. And I've just collected 50 of just objectively good things that he's been able to accomplish in his first term.
Well, thinking about the top line, as you know, you make a closing argument, it's got to be sort of one thing that you're trying to implant on the mind of the voter, one question that you're trying to get them to ask themselves and answer in the affirmative for you. And it seems to me one of them, I mean, there's multiple questions, of course, but this 56% of people surveyed by Gallup who think they're better off than they were 4 years ago, even in the context of the pandemic for the last 8 months. Boy, it seems to me, I mean, it's as anodyne as it may be, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? If you are, vote for Trump. If you feel like you are, you vote for Trump. I mean, that 56% number would suggest that's a winning question and answer for him.
The logic, I guess, would extend itself to if you are better today than you believe you were 4 years ago, then you would reward the incumbent, the guy in the White House, because all that goodness apparently happened on his watch. I just think that most people who answer that question remember what their own lives were, even in the middle of March, before we really got sort of the draconian lockdowns that we experienced a few months ago. When you have the New York Times reporting, and they write, the New York Times, finally, black wages are rising, and you have a wealth gap, which hasn't happened in 2 generations, actually closing between white and black earners. That's the New York Times reporting that. Then you know that something real is actually happening financially in the lives of Americans. We're talking about historic levels, not just of unemployment, for all across the board, like Asian Americans, some of the most successful people in this country. Like the president reduced their unemployment number, but it's also historic lows for black and Hispanic poverty. Hispanics were 3 times more likely to start a new business under Trump than they were under Obama. And we're talking about a group of people who are the most entrepreneurial people in the country. We're talking about new female-led businesses hit a historic high in terms of average new firms opened in 2018 and in 2019. And a disproportionate amount of those new firms were started by black women. Black women, ironically enough, voted for this president the least, but they benefited the most from his economic policies. I mean, you just go down the line, the chapter list in this book, and it's just, I am just doing the research. I am doing the reporting, honestly, that the political press did not want to do for 4 years. They were much more interested in conspiracy theories about Russia and peddling, a phony dossier.
Well, one of the things that's useful about this, about providing this sort of laundry list of things that were actually done, is you can bump them up against things that were actually promised. And again, one of the things that makes this president so unique, really, and I think engenders so much loyalty, is that he has done or attempted to do everything he said he would try to do, if not accomplish, as a candidate.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, and I write, very honestly and very soberly that obviously the president didn't get everything right. But I lay out in the context of the introduction just the headwinds that Donald Trump actually faced. I mean, he walked in. And I think he knew this and realized that he was taking on the toughest job in the world. But he literally had the political press in this country fantasizing and writing thousands of word articles about his impeachment in March of 2016. He wasn't even the Republican presidential nominee in March of 2016. I mean, that doesn't actually include a very real deep state military apparatus that was very hawkish against Donald Trump becoming commander-in-chief. I sadly didn't get to write about it, but he is doing something that would have been, I think, just laughable 5 years ago in brokering these normalization deals between Arab countries and Israel, but none of that would have been possible without the president scrapping the Iran nuclear deal that came under the Obama-Biden administration that wrongly assumed that Iran would be this moral actor that we could actually take their word for. The president realized and recognized that Iran, just as Russia and China and North Korea are, they are enemies of ours. And he implemented more sanctions, destroying Iran's oil business, which funded their terrorism around the world.
Well, that brings,
the president again, yeah.
Well, that brings us, to the famous Muslim ban. What exactly did that entail? Because people don't understand the truth.
It was and continues to be one of the political media's wildest conspiracy theories. And out of this so-called Muslim ban, the president also created a registry. The press never actually tells us if the president has updated the names on this so-called registry or how it actually, calculates new converts to Islam. It's completely insane. It's insane because the 7 countries that the president put restrictions on travel to the United States were the same 7 countries that Barack Obama included in the same piece of legislation that he signed in December 2015. The only difference is that the orange man happened to be president when he signed similar legislation. And the media, the press just ran wild with it. But interestingly enough, the president is actually getting more support today from Muslim Americans than he did 4 years ago.
And so,
also,
go ahead.
I should say that the ban excluded 87% of the world's Muslims and actually included the country North Korea, where I don't think there's a high Muslim population.
And with respect to, just going back to matters economic, one of the things that he touts as perhaps more important than what you already described, which was the tax cuts, is his, it's not so much even deregulation, it's sort of restraining the inertia behind ever more regulation that punctuated his first term.
Sure, and I mean that went a long way to getting rid of the individual mandate. For the first time in the history of the country, just being alive made you subject to breaking the law. Like, I didn't have health insurance for 6 months out of 2016 just because of the circumstances of my life. I left a job that afforded me health care, and my partner at the time, I was going to get onto her health care, but I made the mistake of not having health care for too long is the point, and I had to add $1,300 in my check to the Treasury for that year to the total, and that's one of those policies that's sort of an invisible impact on the purse if you're a working household, but that also came with the annexation of several more regulations. We don't get the type of manufacturing boom that this president has presided over. You're talking about creating more manufacturing jobs than any president in a first term since the 1970s. We don't actually get that if the president doesn't sign the Jobs and Tax Cuts Act, because it wiped away just an exponential amount of regulations, freeing up those business and industry sector leaders, knowing that, okay, I don't have to worry about the burden of regulations and more taxes, that I can long-term make decisions to hire more people to fill the demand of manufacturing that absolutely was robust under this president.
He is Jerome Hudson, the entertainment editor for Breitbart, author of the new book, 50 Things They Don't Want You to Know About Trump. Jerome Hudson, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
This is Jerry Boyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. The Obama administration was once defined by low growth and high spending. When Obama took office, our debt to GDP ratio was around 90%. Today, it has passed 105%. While high debt is always a risk, you can to some extent outrun it with high growth. Under President Trump, while spending increased, it was partially offset by relatively high growth. The Obama years were bad for our economy, but our debt was low enough that we were able to avoid economic collapse. Neither of these would be the case under a Biden administration. Our total national debt is higher than ever in peacetime, and Biden's plan will only raise it dramatically further. He's proposing over $5 trillion in new spending and the largest tax increase in 70 years. Low growth, high debt, and a growing tax burden. That's a very dangerous combination, and that's exactly what we should expect from a Biden presidency.
Looking to refinance your mortgage or